You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hey y'all, Michael here. A couple of quick updates and some info about this episode. First, Charlie will not be able to make it to Southern Gothic Festival in Camden, South Carolina in October. However, our friends Tally Johnson and his amazing wife Alexandria Christian, who is an incredible author, will be there. So go check him out and tell him we said hey. Second, this is the first of a two-part episode, this spooky season's big historical deep dive. Charlie and I had the pleasure of recording this in person, face-to-face, something we've almost never done with Arcane Carolinas, and it was so much fun. If you're curious to read more on this topic, there are links in the show notes to the books and articles that I read in the course of my research. Those will be to the Cardinal system, which can be used to find copies in public libraries across the state of North Carolina. If you're in South Carolina, I recommend the website for the South Carolina State Library, which can be used to search the SC Lens network of libraries and resources. Now is also an excellent time to encourage you to check your voter registration and make a plan to vote in the upcoming election. I'll link to the voter registration and early voting websites for North Carolina and South Carolina in the notes for this episode, and the federal website that has links to information for every state. And I'm going to do that in every episode for the rest of the spooky season. Personally, I recommend early voting. It's just a lot easier to plan for, and it gives me peace of mind to know that I've gotten it taken care of. And if you're in North Carolina, you can also register and vote on the spot at early voting, or fix anything that needs to be corrected with your voter registration. In both states, make a plan, tell a friend, take your ID, and go vote. Studies actually show people are a lot more likely to vote if they make a plan and then tell it to somebody. So if you need somebody to tell, you are always welcome to email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to Arcane Carolinas. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I am your other co-host, multi-award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams.
And I'm very curious to hear how this sounds because we're a little out of our element right now.
Yeah, we're in a really fancy podcast studio that 5 minutes ago I posted a picture of on Facebook. So people will have an image in their heads of where we are seated.
Yeah, we're legit today. I even got to walk through a graveyard to get here to get in the right headspace for spooky season.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, but today, you're driving today.
Yes.
So I have no idea what we're talking about.
Okay, we're going to talk about a deep dive history topic.
Okay.
It's so weird to look at each other.
It is. It's very, very strange.
Next time I'll bring blinders or something.
For full disclosure, we had this exact same reaction the last time we used a real recording studio for another podcast, where it took us a solid several episodes of that show to get into the swing of things where we were actually clicking and not basically making jokes the whole time.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was also a little weird because there was a studio engineer who was watching us through a window.
There's two.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they were great.
They were fantastic.
Here we have none of that. We have a piece of paper over a small window on the door.
We're going to start with some really old history. Are you familiar with the biblical story of Rahab?
Wow. All right. I'm flashing back to Sunday school, maybe?
Pretty much.
Is it a Sunday school appropriate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Story, then I've heard it. I can't remember it.
Rahab appears in the Torah and in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible and the book of Joshua.
Okay.
In that book,
the walls came a-tumbling down.
Yes, exactly. As Joshua's forces approached Jericho, Joshua sent 2 spies into the city to assess their defenses.
Yes.
There, they meet this person who lived in Jericho named Rahab. Talking about Rahab is a little complicated because historically, translations have referred to her as a sex worker, but some translations say innkeeper. And there's a really complicated element there throughout that book. The New Testament, rather, starts with a virgin and ends with a harlot. The beast of Babylon, etc. And throughout the Bible, there are stories of the reverse. The woman who is the fallen woman who is then redeemed. Mary Magdalene is sometimes interpreted that way, and other figures.
Well, I think the other thing that's important to acknowledge when you're talking about any holy book, I don't know a lot about holy books outside of the Bible, but I can speak to the fact that different translations are usually approved by people in positions of power.
Yes.
And it might suit the narrative at the time. I mean, there is a literal King James version.
Right.
Because King James decided that there needed to be a new version.
Yeah. Bottom line, a lot of times it is difficult for translations of the Bible to acknowledge that a woman can play an important part in the role without denigrating her. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that happens here, and she gets turned into this weird object lesson of even she was able to be a part of the story. And that even she really bothers me.
Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge, so there's a small age gap between us.
Yeah.
But it is the ideal age gap, I think, where we can meet in the middle on certain topics, but also expose each other to topics that we wouldn't otherwise know about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So are you familiar with the video game series produced by the publisher Wisdom Tree?
No.
Okay. Follow me to the much more recent history.
Okay.
In the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
And there was a publisher called Color Dreams, and they made essentially bootleg Nintendo games.
Oh, okay.
Nintendo, the corporation, had a lockout chip. Only games that they approved could be made for the system.
Okay.
Because they wanted to avoid what happened with Atari, where there was just a glut of third-party publishers just like churning out shovelware.
Yeah.
Someone cracked that. Actually, several people cracked that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Atari actually cracked it. They had a subdivision called Tengen where they would publish stuff.
You gotta love ambition.
Yeah. These are games that would not have the Nintendo seal of approval on them. Color Dreams realized that there was a market for Christian bookstores to sell Bible-themed games.
Oh my God. Okay.
I had two of them. So I had Bible Adventures, which was not a very good game.
Okay, yeah.
It was all Old Testament also, so that you could cross-market to Judaic consumers as well. So it's all Old Testament. The second one was King of Kings, which was a much better game, where the thing that I remember about that was there was a game where you were the wise men and you would ride camels through the desert spitting at things like scorpions and stuff whilst following the star. So those were like the two big titles.
Yeah.
But the series continued on. They did a Zelda knockoff, and there was one about Jericho.
Okay.
I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah, sure.
So I wonder if Rahab was in the game and how Rahab was represented in the game.
That's a really interesting question. Now that you've explained what these games were, I do remember that they existed. I knew people who had them as their games, but I never actually played them.
Yeah, they're a curiosity of the time.
But I am also very curious to know whether Rahab is listed or, featured and how she is described.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt since this is going to open with talking about Rahab, I wanted to talk about some of the problems I have with the way that Rahab is talked about.
Sure. Yeah, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, video game produced in 1992.
Wow. All right.
It was a game themed around the Battle of Jericho, as described in the book of Joshua, in which the Israelites toppled the defensive wall of the city of Jericho. Give me some gameplay. Give me some gameplay notes. Come on. I don't mean to hijack your episode.
Don't worry. It's all good. Plenty of time.
I missed one. This is a direct sequel to 1991's release, Exodus.
That's funny because in the Old Testament, Joshua is basically the direct sequel to Exodus also.
Wow. The game had 100 levels and 10 bonus stages.
Good grief.
And no background music.
Oh, 15 hours of silence.
I guess. I'm reading about it. You play as Joshua battling Amorites, Hittites, and other Canaanites.
Welcome to John Cage's Bible Adventures.
Let's see. All levels have a time limit. You have to pillage enough gold, silver, brass, and iron to meet the quota for the level.
Wow.
You also have to collect 5 Joshua questions. That's in quotes. I don't know what that means.
That is bleak.
Yeah, no mention of Rahab.
Oh, well.
Anyway, all that ties into the fact that there's a brand new Arcane Carolinas video game available for your Atari 2600.
It does tie into that.
It does. Do you like shovelware? Because I made some.
That's so funny.
All right, I'm done. Yeah, there's no Rahab in there.
Oh, well. Rahab in the story is the person that these two spies meet and stay with. And she figures out their deal. She actually is very sympathetic to the cause of the Hebrews and their desire to conquer Jericho because she has realized that her local government is irredeemably corrupt and dangerously tyrannical. She lets these 2 spies stay with her. When authorities in Jericho are searching for them, she actually hides them on the roof in these big bundles of flax that she has them
it's
like
all
crawl
coming
inside.
back to me. There's a rope involved at some point, right?
And when they leave, she says to them, I've helped you. Now you got to help me. I know that y'all are going to come conquer this city. And as I saw pointed out in repeated discussions of this, at the time, the norm was when you conquered somebody, you ransacked the city, destroyed everything, and killed everybody.
Salt the earth.
Yeah, pretty much. When they call it Old Testament, they mean Old Testament.
Right. Real wrathful stuff.
Yes. So she says to them, when you come back, you need to spare me and my family. And I don't just mean me and my kids. I mean me and my brothers and sisters and my grandma and granddad and everybody. And they tell her, okay, they're about to climb out of a window in the back of her house because her house backed up to the wall. Mm-hmm. She had a direct egress out of the city.
That seems like a real strategic error. Whoever's building this wall, put a couple holes in the side.
I feel like real estate in Jericho had gotten to be really at a premium.
This unit has a window.
Makes it dangerously unsafe, but it's got a window. You've got a view of the people about to invade the city.
Right. Want to see the conquerors at the wall? Buy now. Get in early.
I was just telling Michael this weekend, many years ago, I was looking at a house that looked out on this beautiful forest. And it was at a time when real estate development was particularly ramping up in the place where I was shopping. And my real estate agent walked out onto the deck as I was standing there gazing in wonder at this view. And all she said was, yeah, but in a year, it'll be a Best Buy.
Wow. At least she told you.
Oh, yeah, she did. I really appreciated it. She earned her commission. So as they're about to go out this window, they say, okay, if you hang a red cord.
It was a cord, not a rope. There you go.
Well,
semantics.
Yeah. If you hang a red cord in the window of your house, then when we come back, we'll know that you kept your promise to not reveal us or tell where we went or whatever to the authorities. And we will spare your home and anybody in it. But we're not going to spare anybody else. That's your signal to us that you're good and we're good. She said, okay, great. And she let a rope down. They had said cord specifically because she was lowering a rope out the window for them to climb down out of the city. They climb down the rope, take off into the mountains. The next day, the authorities show up and ask, has she seen these 2 Hebrews? She says, yeah, they went that way, pointing the other direction. And I didn't know what their deal was, but they seemed sketchy to me, so I told them to get out.
It's some Looney Tunes stuff.
It really is.
They went that way.
The authorities buy it. They take off in that direction. And eventually, the Hebrews show up. Rahab has hung the cord in her window. Everybody in her house is good.
Can I tell you how stressed I would be that my cord might not be bright enough for the right shade of red or how long does it have to be? I would be real hung up on the details. I might hang several.
Oh, I would, yeah. A wide spectrum of shades of red.
Yeah.
Okay, I need crimson, and I need scarlet, and I need burgundy, and I need fire engine, and I need stoplight, and I need hydrant, and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
And one of the reasons why this story is considered important is that Rahab was a Canaanite, not a Hebrew. And later, she and her family were incorporated into the Hebrew people. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the first stories of conversion to Judaism.
Okay.
And this is the moment when it is an ethnicity and a religion, but it is also a religion to which people can convert, even if they are not of that ethnicity, which is an interesting detail.
Yeah. I'm racking my brain for Old Testament knowledge, and I think you're on the money there. I think prior to that, it was all about the people, the ethnicity.
Yeah. And this is an important note in the story that she chose the Hebrew cause because she knew it was more righteous, even though they were the invaders. And that is directly relevant to the rest of this story.
And we got to talk about 30-year-old games that somebody's going to remember, and they're going to be like, I had that too.
Oh, they are, totally. So were you aware that there was a widespread secret society of pro-union organizers in the Carolinas during the Civil War?
It's not much of a secret society if it's widespread. More of just a social club.
That actually also has bearing because a lot of what we know about them has to be inferred from circumstantial evidence.
So you have mentioned this to me, and I knew that there were dissenters, but I didn't know that there was an actual formal society.
There were actually multiple.
Okay.
The nickel version of the Civil War is always, well, everybody in the South just loved human slavery.
Right.
And loved the idea of secession and as this big unified movement where the South seceded, and that was that.
Well, it's easier that way for the nickel version, not to use the term that we just used.
Yeah, it's a little easier to fit into the third grade curriculum window that you've got for the Civil War.
Yes, that's a much more articulate way of putting it.
That version depicts the desire to leave the Union and to continue enslaving black people as universal sentiments. Mm-hmm. But we have talked about the fact that that's not the case. Right. Henry Berry Lowry, a lot of other stories that we've discussed. In the same way that today, and I feel like this is an especially useful comparison, since we're in the middle of a presidential election, every state is considered a red state or a blue state, but really every state is a lot more purple than that summarizes it as being.
Yeah, people are complicated.
Yeah.
There's nuance.
And populations are diverse. Right. And that was as true then as it is now. So that's the distinction to draw, is that there was a wide spectrum of feeling. Mm-hmm. In the Bear Creek Swamp episode, for instance, we talked about the fact that Sherman was accompanied on his march by a cavalry unit that was from Alabama. There were actually counter-rebellions that sprang up in large numbers in multiple places even before secession happened.
That I did not know.
Mm-hmm. This was throughout the South. A couple of examples from somewhere other than the Carolinas. The first one that I read about, it's not the first one that existed, was the Peace and Constitution Society, also known as the Arkansas Peace Society. It was formed in Arkansas. The Confederate government sent military units there to engage in a campaign of explicit murder and mass arrest. They were not hiding what was going on. They wanted everybody to get the point.
We are coming to kill you because you do not agree with us.
Yes.
Okay.
It was estimated that maybe as many as 2,400 people, maybe more, had actually armed themselves and joined the Arkansas Peace Society explicitly to engage the Confederate military and try to liberate Arkansas from within.
Interesting.
And eventually the Confederacy had to declare explicitly that membership in the Peace Society was punishable by death on the spot.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you couldn't wear the button anymore?
No. Yeah, no more wearing the button.
Better go take my bumper sticker off the horse and buggy.
Take down the yard sign, etc. There was a second group known as the Alabama Peace Society that formed essentially immediately upon the initiation of the war. And it grew beyond Alabama. It operated in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, and North Carolina. But it was called the Alabama Peace Society because it started there. And they operated via a very organized cell structure.
Okay.
So you'd have a local cell of people in the Alabama Peace Society, and there was one person in that group who knew how to contact the rest of the organization.
Support your local 506 branch of the
Yes.
Alabama Peace Society.
They offered refuge to deserters. They protected people who were being threatened with conscription, all kinds of stuff. They helped people find the Underground Railroad. They also took an active role in politics. Because especially in Alabama, all the politicians that advocated for secession, as soon as secession happened, volunteered for the military and left their government posts.
That surprises me, actually.
It does.
I don't want to say good for them, but I'm like, all right, they put their money where their mouth was. Okay.
I think they saw themselves as the people who got to sit at the back and drink the tea.
Sure.
And watch what happened.
Can you imagine any politician today doing that? I guess is my point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not saying that their cause was right, but I'm just like, could you imagine any politician doing any amount of that?
Right. Once all these civilian government positions were emptied, then all these people who were not enthusiastic about secession had to fill them. So the Alabama Peace Society took over the government of Alabama.
Another strong move. I like everything about this story so far. That's interesting.
They organized campaigns to get people to join the Peace Society. They essentially held the majority in the state legislature.
So they were able to have buttons and stickers.
Oh, they elected a governor who was a peace governor. Okay. The governor of Alabama under the Confederacy was opposed to the war.
Okay. I like how it was that short also.
It was like 5 minutes. We're seceding. Here's the new boss. The new boss walks in. These guys can go straight to hell.
Oh, look, the war's over. Yeah, that worked out. I was on the right side of history there.
One of the Alabama Peace Society's most successful initiatives was that they would volunteer for the Confederate military, and then they would get in a military unit and start trash talking the Confederacy and get everybody around them to desert together. And they would be like, I've got a cousin who can get us out of here. And then 30 guys would leave.
Man, these pants are terribly itchy. Can you believe that they're treating us this way? If only there was some way to escape.
They were so effective that the Confederacy was frightened of them basically from the get-go because they were conducting raids against Confederate positions in northern Florida, southern Georgia, all through Alabama, Mississippi, into Tennessee, especially once Tennessee was liberated by the Union, which was pretty much immediate. So they were a very active and highly regarded organization.
Yeah, I had no idea about any of this. This is very interesting to me.
And a third group was called the Heroes of America.
Okay, that's bold.
It is.
You're going to call yourself something, that's a way to go.
It's a big swing as names go.
You better deliver.
They also called themselves the Order of the Heroes of America. They called themselves the Heroes of the Union. They called themselves the Heroes of the Constitution.
Not dulling the edge on that.
Oh, no. They kept that heroes part, no matter what they were heroes of.
I am the champion of the universe. Really? Yes.
They're like, in about 110 years, this band called Queen is going to make a song, and it is about us.
Right, exactly. Oh, all right then.
The other Peace Societies, the Alabama Peace Society, the Arkansas Peace Society, they called themselves that because they supported immediate cessation of the war and rejoining of the Union.
Can I just say that it must have sucked to be in the Arkansas Peace Society? Yeah, we're doing it too. Oh, no. Oh, they sent a lot of people to kill us.
Oh, yes. They sent thousands of soldiers.
Meanwhile, the Alabama Peace Society is like, why don't you try it?
And that's pretty much the deal between the two. Yeah, that's not an apt description at all. The Confederacy was kind of like, crud. Right. So, yeah.
Push the smaller one around and then a bigger one popped up.
Yeah. And that trend continued. With the other two, we know where and when they started. We know who was in charge. We know a lot about their structure. We don't know as much about the Heroes of America because they were so successful at remaining secret.
Again, there's a disconnect there for me. You're going to give yourself the biggest title and then be secret? What?
I don't know. They were really good at it.
Okay. I just imagine like when kids sit down with like blank pieces of paper and come up with their little societies and invent their own like superhero names. I'm Musket Man. Yeah. I'm one of the heroes of America. Oh, I'm going to be. If you're Musket Man, then I get to be a cavalry guy.
Remember that because there's a point where they do that.
Okay.
You're not wrong at all.
Behold, the Legion of Cannons. I thought that was hyperbole. Like,
no, that's the name of the order.
Right. So like,
yeah, no, that's what it says on the side of the van.
Full disclosure, I didn't know what the topic was going to be. And on the topic list, it just says Heroes of America. So I was just like, oh man, this must be a like real grab bag of different stories. Nope.
No, it is a group.
Also for the listener, Michael is visibly getting annoyed with me being hung up on the fact. So I'm done. All right.
Okay. They also had another name though. And it might be better to use that one. The Red Strings.
Oh, like Rahab.
Like Rahab.
Cool. I got that reference.
The Red Strings. We'll use that.
You can call them the heroes.
No, it's all good. That name is actually very relevant at the end. But the Red Strings started in what was at the time called the Quaker Belt of North Carolina.
Sure. Randolph County.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Randolph.
Lots of conscientious dissenters.
Forsyth. Yeah. Guilford, all those counties in the very middle of the Piedmont. Yadkin County was very big. That was an area where there were a ton of Quakers and a ton of Moravians. We've talked about Salem Village a bunch. And those people were almost entirely pacifists. So they would be conscientious objectors to any war. And that had been problematic for them socially during the Revolutionary War.
We talk about that a lot in the Purgatory Mountain episode.
Yes, this is exactly that area. But not everybody in that area was a Quaker. But pretty much everybody in that area was opposed to secession politically within the South. What you saw was that coastal regions, like the first third from the coast in of any state, was all for secession because that was where the plantation economy was dominant. And then in the middle, like Piedmont kind of area, it was a little more, maybe not. And then the further west or north you got, basically the closer to the mountains or in the mountains, then there were plenty of people who thought secession was a fine idea. And there were a lot of people who did not. In the county where I grew up, for instance, when North Carolina did its referendum on secession, the vote was 9-1 against.
I think it also says a lot, you mentioned industry, for people's day-to-day lives. and what that looked like in that region.
Yeah.
The further west you go, the causes for secession had less of an impact. So I was like, why are we quitting?
Yeah.
Like, what?
And there was a lot of resentment, especially in the upstate of South Carolina and western North Carolina and southwestern Virginia, towards the political elites, which are all of the plantation class, because the plantation class refused to fund, right up until the 1850s, infrastructure like railroad lines or roads into those western parts of those states. The people in the western parts of those states, or in the upstate of South Carolina, wanted that infrastructure because they wanted access to the economy. But the political powers that were, they didn't want that infrastructure because they saw any new transportation route as an avenue of escape for enslaved people. And they were very explicit about this in debates in state legislatures in all three of those states, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. There were open debates where people would say, we can't build a railroad to your district because if we do, enslaved people will use it to escape.
Well, I think that's a tale as old as time. Slavery is the topic of that era, right, in that moment. But we still have lobbyist groups that have vested business interests with politicians as their puppets.
Totally. Absolutely.
So that still happens, that sort of divide. Man, hi. The views expressed are that of Charlie Mushaw, not of Michael G. Williams or Arcane Carolinas, the podcast. I have a strong dislike for lobbyist groups and, in general, politicians.
I don't think a ton of people are going to find that controversial.
Don't like them. But even if they're for things that I like, I still think the system sucks.
The Red Strings, and actually a ton of different grassroots organizing against the Confederacy, started before secession had even been formalized.
I think, yeah, you kind of got it, right? The writing's on the wall. Start moving.
Yeah, and this is probably the organizing that led to the creation of the Heroes of America, but it's not known for sure. In 1981, two scholars, a guy named William Allman and a guy named David Scarborough, published a paper on the Heroes of America / the Red Strings. And in it, they say it probably started in the Quaker Belt because there was so much organizing there. Like you had said, that's mainly Randolph County, like Asheboro, the State Zoo, Forsyth County with Winston-Salem, Guilford County with Greensboro, and Davidson County with Lexington. It also extended beyond them, basically everywhere in central North Carolina from Chatham County to Statesville, like east to west, and from Winston-Salem and Greensboro in the north to Lexington in the south. So this huge swath of central North Carolina. It's because there were so many Quakers and Moravians, but also there were so many people who did not see a benefit to themselves from the plantation system, and they did not buy the rhetoric of the Confederacy. The political and military leaders who advocated for secession to protect slavery had promised that they were doing so to protect individual liberty. So everybody was just expected to buy that the thing to do to protect individual liberty was to make sure that there were still enslaved people. It's a completely bananas argument, but that was the argument that they made pretty openly. A lot of people recognized the secessionists for what they were. They considered them would-be tyrants. One of the things that Allman and Scarborough point out is that war is great for document generation because people start writing to each other about the war, and then both sides will intercept those letters because they're worried that they're espionage, and then they preserve it all in case they ever need to arrest anybody.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The Confederacy intercepted tons of people's mail. A lot of letters never got delivered, and they saved it all in case they ever needed to use it against anybody. So there's a ton of personal correspondence from the Civil War, just from like regular people writing to regular people. An enormous percentage of that is people saying, the people in charge of this are not doing it for us. They're going to turn on us on a dime.
Nowadays, that's all just done on your phone.
Yeah. These days, it's tweets and skeets and whatever.
Everything's just preserved and listened to and monitored. Yeah.
But opposition to secession and explicit support for the abolition of slavery was really notably high in the Piedmont and in the upstate. Not all of it, like I said, was Quakers and Moravians, but a lot of it was. And
those guys that killed the hunter.
Yeah.
And then blamed the Quakers because nobody would go looking.
Right. And it was really existing class divisions and political positions.
This is a great episode, by the way. I'm learning a lot. I feel like we're still in the beginning.
Yeah, we are.
I know how your episodes are formatted. I'm like, wow, we're still in the opening act here, and this is really compelling. I wonder where this is going.
So regardless of the multiple causes of opposition to the Confederacy, organized organized opposition materialized pretty much immediately. As soon as there was talk that North Carolina would secede, there was open organizing against it. The Confederate leadership had said to people, if we secede and there's a war, don't worry, it'll be over in 90 days. That was the widespread promise of the Confederate military.
We're going to take Kiev in 3 days.
Exactly. It was exactly the same thing. The Confederate political leadership tried to sell people on supporting the war by saying it's going to be over in no time. And they literally in April of 1861 were saying it'll be over before the summer's done. Yeah. How did that work out?
Hey-o.
Right away, there were a lot of sign-ups for the Confederate military by people who were enthusiastic about secession. But the same thing that happened in the state government of Alabama happened in regular life throughout the South. All the people who were enthusiastic about secession went and joined the military, and everybody who didn't go and join the military was not necessarily enthusiastic about secession.
I have a question you might not have an answer for.
Sure.
Because I don't know if it was part of your research.
Yeah.
Outside of ideological motivations, were there sign-on bonuses and direct financial incentives for people?
I don't know.
Because I'd be curious about that, an individual's motivation. Because one of the things that the sort of invisible glue that makes society work is that people are very hesitant to give up their comfort.
Yeah.
Right? So even if they're saying the war is going to be over in 90 days, there's still a chance you're going to die. Right? Especially back then. We've talked about how unpleasant enlistment was. So I'd just be curious about what motivators outside of the ideological and industrial existed to pry an everyman off their farm and sign up.
I don't know the answer to that. Initially, I'm not sure that there was anything. And later, it's not so much that there was an incentive as there wasn't the carrot, just the stick.
Right. And we've talked about that in other episodes as well. Yeah, it's that initial fervor and moment that's interesting to me from a historical perspective of what motivates people to lay it all on the line. Because again, this was a rebellion. This was people choosing to leave the United States. This wasn't someone going, I'm going to fight for the freedom and constitutional ideology of the United States. That wasn't the motivator.
Yeah.
It was, we're leaving the United States. And that to me is just, there had to have been a sign-on bonus or something. Because like, what?
I think that to my knowledge, the only motivator was the rhetoric around secession and around Lincoln specifically. Okay. In the South, Lincoln was portrayed by the people who wanted to secede as this unbelievable, out-of-control, wannabe tyrant. Policies of the federal government were referred to as coercion government. And the idea was, well, we want to do what we want to do, which is enslave people. And they want to tell us to stop. So we're trying to be coerced. So they're taking away our liberty. Let's make sure that we don't let them take away our ability to take away the liberty of somebody else.
Yeah, man, I just want to go to work, come home and have dinner and chill out.
Some people were really into this rhetoric and really into this idea of, I'm going to go to war and be a hero. Some people were, I think, probably worried about what would happen to their families if they didn't sign up.
So I feel like I'm derailing you a lot. And this is probably because we're in person.
No, but see, that's an interesting point, though. And in my own family's history, the legend, I don't know how accurate it is, but the legend is that basically they decided to split the difference because they weren't sure what would happen. And they were more afraid of retaliation than they were against their families, a wider family, than they were about consequences to themselves.
And fear is a motivator. I get that.
Yeah. In May of 1861, technically before secession had been enacted, there were 2 attempts to raise units of the Home Guard. When we think about the Confederate Home Guard, we think about absolutely horrible people at the end of the war going around and seizing whatever they could get their hands on. But the Home Guard actually existed from the get-go. And there were 2 units in May of 1861 that people tried to raise because there was so much open organizing against secession and against the Confederacy.
Did the Heroes of America have a logo? Did they have a stamp they would leave places to be like they were here?
No, but they did have another symbol they used. But we're going to talk about that.
Okay. I'm really hung up on that. I want to get back to them. No, I know they're the whole topic. But
we're going to get there. Those 2 attempts were because there were such open armed organizing groups that 2 people who were in the Confederate Home Guard tried to raise units and then had to write to the governor, the first Confederate governor, and say, I couldn't get enough people to join the Home Guard, and I'm scared that these parts of North Carolina are never going to participate in the Confederacy. So from day one, they knew. By August of 1861, North Carolina had started sending military units to Davidson County to put down counter-rebellions. So that stuff that had been happening in Arkansas, where there are these campaigns of murder and mass arrest, were also being perpetrated in North Carolina to keep people from organizing against the Confederacy. In fact, there was this guy named John Hilton, and he was so secure as an organizer that he was bragging to everybody, I've got hundreds of people ready to fight. He got arrested for threatening violence. I'm sure that when the Confederate military showed up and killed people and arrested a bunch of them, there was nothing violent that happened.
Right.
They were suppressing his armed counter-rebellion. But that suppression of armed counter-organizing simply pushed everybody's energies into, well, we just have to do everything out of sight. That's what caused people to start forming secret societies in North Carolina. This is because they were having open meetings. Hundreds of people would show up, fill a church, fill a town square, whatever. Somebody would get up on a barrel and talk and be like, I think that the Confederacy is garbage. We all know that these people are lying to us. We all know that there's plantation owners who are just trying to get us to fight a war for them. There was really open stuff about this. The Confederate government was immediately freaked out. In fact, Almond and Scarborough talk about the fact that transportation infrastructure in central North Carolina was pretty well developed. And that was actually what made it possible for the Confederates to suppress the organizing. Because there was just as much anti-secession sentiment in western North Carolina, but there weren't railroads into it, to every part of it, in the way that there were in central North Carolina. Literally, somebody would find out that there was going to be an organizing meeting, and a bunch of soldiers in Raleigh would get loaded on a train, and that train would go whoop over to Lexington or someplace. They would all pile off and go break up the meeting. But they couldn't get people up to like Avery County as quickly.
Going back to the same era as the Bible Adventure video games, there was a Nintendo game called North versus South. And troop movement via railroad was it was a strategy game, basically, and like mini levels where you would move your little guys in battle. But overall, it's a strategy game. You were confined to, if I'm remembering correctly, again, it's been a very long time, and I think I only rented it once, but you were confined to where the railroads could go to effectively cut off other people. So it's just interesting. A lot of weird callbacks to old games.
Games are one of the ways that we process in popular culture stuff that is complicated to talk about outside of entertainment.
Yeah.
That
also tells you where my head's at right now. I'm going to make a Heroes of America video game.
That'd be pretty great. When I say that it was really widespread and open, and that everybody knew that this organizing was happening, by January of 1862, newspapers in North Carolina and South Carolina were printing stories about secret societies being organized in a way that they were like, but that's bad, and those people are terrible, and we should not do that. Almond and Scarborough found correspondence between different newspaper editors at the time, many of whom were explicitly pro-Confederate, saying to each other, there is organizing on a scale we cannot begin to talk about in the newspaper, or everybody will just go join it. They were choosing to acknowledge that it was happening because it was so widespread they couldn't not acknowledge it and be taken seriously. And at the same time, they were trying to suppress knowledge of how widespread it was.
Right. Minimize it.
Yeah.
It's happening, but it's only 5 people.
Yeah. Hilton got released from prison a few months later, and he just went right back to organizing. And in March of 1862, he had a meeting that got raided by the Confederate military. He managed to make it out the back of the building while everybody else was getting arrested. He got shuttled off to Tennessee, where he joined the Union Army and went and fought for the Union for the rest of the war. The HOA, I shouldn't call it that.
I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, we're really jumping around. They talked about the shrubs in front of Hilton's house and how they needed to be trimmed.
And he was so mad that he organized a counter-rebellion.
He painted his door an unapproved color.
Yes. I know of a neighborhood where there is a shade of color that is the approved color for people's mailboxes.
Oh boy.
And in the hardware store that's next to that neighborhood, that's the only place you can buy that particular shade. And it is named the neighborhood name, so that if you get a new mailbox, you can go there and say, I need
mailbox paint.
Yeah. It's wild, but
how far we've come.
Yes. It was a much larger organization than it sounds like from what I've said so far. When Hilton's meeting got raided in 1862, that meeting was organizing against the fact that the state was going to start conscripting soldiers.
Yeah, I could see that generating some meetings.
Yeah. By early 1862, the Union was already invading the coast of North Carolina. Even though the Confederacy was simply talking about having conscriptions by then. The state of North Carolina was like, we're going to start conscripting for the state militia because we have to beef up the state militia to go attempt to keep the Union out of the coastal region, which didn't go very well for them. But like I said, everybody who wanted to join the military had joined the military by then. So the state was already having to force people to fight under threat of arrest. And plenty of people were really, really, really unhappy about that.
Sure.
The Confederacy said they were just going to be an all-volunteer army. We know everybody's really into this, so we're going to be an all-volunteer army, and it's going to work out great. That was pretty clearly not going to happen.
Yeah.
The Confederacy did start with a pretty large military, but the Union war machine spun up like nobody's business immediately. It was obvious that they were going to be completely overwhelmed. Despite a bunch of early wins, and sometimes you'll hear the Civil War described as, the Confederacy was like this close to winning the whole time. The Confederacy from the end of 1861 knew sooner or later we're going to have to conscript because we're never going to have enough people.
Again, this reflects my lack of Civil War knowledge, but was there any element of Northeastern, what we now call the Rust Belt, manufacturing capacity that influenced the North's ability to achieve dominance in production of weaponry and support materials and stuff like that?
All the industrial presence in the South was about dealing with textiles.
Right. And that's what I was thinking. It was agriculture, textiles, stuff like that.
Yeah. But in terms of being able to make machines, that existed in the North.
Right.
Guns, for instance.
Right.
And this was the era when mass production of weapons using standardized parts came into being. They could just crank out guns and stuff. Whereas down here, these people were showing up to the war with muskets. And I'm not exaggerating.
Literal musketeers.
Yeah. There was a big difference there. And something that Alman and Scarborough point out is that you can tell how widespread the organizing was, even if newspapers weren't covering it, by the fact that every time the Confederate military responded to suppress it, they would send hundreds of troops. They didn't just send a couple of guys to arrest a couple of people who were having a conversation they didn't like.
Right.
They were sending large numbers of people.
Imagine catching that assignment.
Right? Yeah.
I thought you said it wasn't that big of a deal. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. Just go down there and suppress it. Why are there 100 of us?
Yeah. I signed up to protect personal liberty, quote unquote, and now I'm going to go arrest my grandfather for having a prayer meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
You told me this wasn't a big deal. You said there was 5 of them.
Newspapers would actually describe them as being a lot smaller than they were, and they would describe them explicitly as prayer meetings to try to downplay the political angle on them. And they would be portrayed in the media as a church held a prayer meeting to pray for peace.
We can't have peace.
Which is obviously bad. So, yeah, they would leave out the fact that there was a lot of political organizing happening.
Yeah.
In the Haunted Highways episode at Congregate, which as we record has not yet played, but will have played by the time this does, I talked about a design of wagon that was commonly used for moving tobacco around, and it was a Nissan or Nissan wagon.
Got to put your hogs' heads on the Nissan.
Yes. All those newspaper editors who were writing to each other about there is way more organizing than we are able to talk about. We're also talking about the fact that there were so many members of the state legislature who were also against the war, because the same thing that had happened in Alabama was starting to happen in North Carolina.
I'm noticing patterns emerging.
Yeah. In the state legislative elections of 1862, a ton of peace candidates, or peacemen was what they were sometimes called, got elected. Those were often assumed later to be members of the Heroes of America who had explicitly gotten into politics to attempt to steer the state government away from the war. There's a lot of debate around whether or not that is the case, but one of those was this guy named Nissan. He was from the family where the wagons got designed.
Not quite a Ford.
Not quite a Ford.
Imagine being from a family like that, created this thing, right? This method of transportation. That's it. We're set for life. Generations are going to know of the Nissan wagon.
And they did for a long time.
Sure. We're talking about it now. Like, obviously, like there's some sort of historical legacy, but then old Henry Ford, hold my tonic water, hold my chilled tonic.
Right.
That's a callback to another episode, people.
But for many decades, that was the chief form of moving tobacco around. He was a representative in the state legislature from Forsyth County from 1862 to 1864. Another person they talked about was another representative from Forsyth County. He was Dr. Elias Kerner. He was the grandson of the Kerner, for whom Kernersville was named.
Yeah, I was about to say, this sounds oddly familiar.
Yeah, Kerner was a physician. He was also a member of the Heroes of America. He was an anti-war organizer. He was an anti-Confederate organizer. He was a member of the Confederate state legislature from 1862 to 1864.
All 2 years, huh?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep making that joke every single time.
A lot of these people fare well in the 1864 elections. His home is still standing, is on the tour of historic homes in Kernersville. So if you're in Kernersville, you can go look at the home of somebody who was an organizer for the Heroes of America. Allman and Scarborough point out that there was what they called a steady stream of refugees out of North Carolina to the north throughout the war, commonly via the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. We think of the Underground Railroad as only helping escaped slaves get to the north. But it was also for economic refugees. It was for political refugees. It was for people who just didn't want to be here anymore.
Sure.
They knew that they would not personally be able to get across the lines, probably. So they needed help getting there. So it moved a lot of people. As the Underground Railroad moved north through South Carolina and into North Carolina, it branched in North Carolina, and it basically took two paths out of the state. One of those was west through Wilkes County and over the mountains into eastern Tennessee and southwestern Virginia, and then into Kentucky, and then on into Ohio or Indiana. And there are a ton of people in Indiana today who were the descendants of people from North Carolina and South Carolina who went there over the Underground Railroad.
And just decided Indiana was it.
Yeah, they were like, we're not going to bother to go back. Things did not work out there.
Okay.
And the other path was out to the coast and then up to the north or to Europe via ships. The East Coast routes went through New Bern or through Beaufort, both of which we've talked about in the past. The Underground Railroad was also a huge network for information sharing and for the collection of espionage and the transmission of espionage from specifically the Heroes of America. The Heroes spread to have chapters basically everywhere that the Underground Railroad was operating.
Okay.
So pretty quickly, they were recruiting people and had active groups.
It's a very bold proposition. Would you like to be a hero of America?
It's a heck of a pamphlet. They were really active in upstate South Carolina. They were really active in western North Carolina, in the central Piedmont of North Carolina. They were really active in eastern Tennessee. They were really active in southwestern Virginia, but they were also active in West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, the District of Columbia, Maryland, you name it. This group that started in the Quaker Belt in North Carolina spread all over the place.
They were literally across America.
Yes. They became so good at operating in secret and so successful in their activities, and also as a means of continuing to organize once they were outside of, I could go tell those people to stop doing stuff or whatever range, they developed the infrastructure of a secret society. That's one of the few things that we know about how they operated, because otherwise they were really good at staying secret until the end of the war.
Imagine that was quite the party.
Oh, yeah. All right. That is an excellent place to pause this episode. We'll be back in 1 week with the second half, where Charlie and I will get into the secret signs and the means of operating of the Heroes of America in the Carolinas and elsewhere. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind-the-scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
Sorry, that's really rude. You should probably cut that part.
I'll cut that part.